All right, welcome to the deep dive. You've been sending over some really interesting stuff about how what we do online shapes, well, how we decide things. So today we're diving into all this material on the zero moment of truth, the ZMOT.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fascinating look at ZMOT, but from, a psychological angle. Like
Mhm.
what's actually happening in our minds before we buy anything or even before we, actually talk to a company or a brand.
Right, right. So, I mean, before everything went digital, back in the day, marketing had this pretty clear picture with the first moment of truth. That key point when someone's in a store and they decide to buy something. I think Procter and Gamble, they talked about those few seconds at the shelf, like back in 2005 or something.
Mm.
And then, came the second moment of truth, which was all about what happened after you bought something. What was your experience like?
And for a while, that model made perfect sense. You made decisions with like limited information right there in the store. But then the internet kind of changed everything, didn't it?
Yeah. And that's where ZMOT comes in, the zero moment of truth. I think it was Jim Lecinski at Google who coined the term back in 2011. And it's basically, it's all the online research we do before we even engage with a brand or even go to a store. I mean, think about it. How many times do you like Google something or read reviews or compare prices, before you even think about buying? ZMOT, it really captured this massive shift in how we decide. We went from having like a very little information when we were standing in an aisle to suddenly having this huge, online world to navigate.
And what's so interesting is that Google, they didn't just, tack on an extra step to the buying process. They realized that something much deeper had changed in how our minds work when we decide. ZMOT means that by the time we get to that first moment of truth, that purchase, we're already informed. We've already been influenced. So, what we're going to try to do today, just for you, is really dig into, the psychology behind all of this, the ZMOT stuff. And we're going to see how it's really changed not only like marketing, but how search engines are actually designed.
Okay, so let's break this down. So ZMOT kind of emerged as our world shifted from, not having enough information to make decisions to suddenly having way too much. It's like we used to struggle to find enough, and now we're struggling with what to do with this flood of information.
Exactly. It's kind of a 180-degree turn, isn't it? If you think back to like Herbert Simon's work on bounded rationality and satisficing, his idea was, we make the best decisions we can with the information we have, even when it's limited. But ZMOT, it kind of flips that whole idea on its head. Now the challenge is, how do we cope with too many choices, too much data?
Which it kind of brings us to Barry Schwartz's The Paradox of Choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That whole idea that like having tons of choices can actually paralyze us and make us less happy with what we finally choose.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is that ZMOT is, in a way, our way of dealing with that paradox. Like when we're faced with endless options, we naturally go to search. We try to
Yeah.
make sense of it all. So search, it becomes more than just, finding stuff online. It becomes this mental tool for managing all that complexity, narrowing things down.
So, okay, so when I'm like, frantically Googling best travel backpack and I'm, going through all these reviews and comparisons, it's not just about getting the facts. My brain is actually trying to create order out of all of this.
Exactly, yeah. And Google, of course, they've seen this. They understand this psychological need that we all have for structure. And just look at how search results have changed. We've got those snippets and those knowledge panels that, they pop up. And sometimes you even get the answer right there on the page without even clicking.
It's almost like Google is trying to do some of the sorting for us.
Yeah, I mean, in a way they are. It's about reducing what we call the cognitive load. Instead of, clicking through a million websites, Google gives us these little organized chunks of information. And this has big implications for businesses too.
Speaking of which, you had some really great examples. Like, didn't you mention a sauce company and their comparison page for project management software, I think it was?
Oh yeah, they actually found that their project management software comparison page, it generated way more qualified leads than, their pages that just listed out features and benefits, like 3 times more.
Wow.
Yeah. What that tells us is that, even though fewer people might search specifically for a comparison, the people who do, they're much further along in their decision process. They're actively trying to simplify things. And that comparison page, it speaks directly to that ZMOT need. There's also that B2B telecommunications provider, the one that started using those interactive decision tools on their website. They actually saw their sales cycle shrink by something like 22%.
Because they were helping people make sense of it all, right? Instead of just throwing more information at them.
Yeah.
They were actually trying to make the decision easier. It's not just about giving people data. It's about giving them the right data at the right time. Okay, so we've talked about like dealing with too much information. But another huge part of, deciding, especially online, is trust. Like, how do we decide who to believe when we can't even see them, when everything is digital?
Right. And that's where things get really interesting. Like, how do we establish credibility in this huge digital world where we don't have those traditional cues that we used to rely on? You can't exactly shake hands over the internet. You can't, rely on a local reputation in the same way. So psychologically, we start looking for these digital signals of trust.
Like reviews, right? I mean, that's basically word of mouth, but online.
Exactly. And Robert Cialdini's work on influence, it's really key here, like social proof. That idea that, if other people have had good experiences, then, we're more likely to trust it too. And that becomes incredibly powerful online through reviews, ratings, testimonials. And then there's authority. If someone we trust or a respected organization endorses something, well, that carries weight. And then there's consistency. If a brand has a clear message and it's consistent across their website, their social media, everything, that builds trust over time.
And you mentioned something called the trust equation, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's Charles Green and David Maister's framework. And it basically breaks trustworthiness down into these components: credibility, reliability, and intimacy.
Yeah.
And all of that is divided by self-orientation. And what's interesting is that when we're in that ZMOT phase, when we're searching online, a lot of our behavior is like unconsciously trying to evaluate those things. We're looking for signs of expertise, which is, credibility. We're looking for promises kept, which is reliability. And we're also kind of looking for that sense that the brand actually cares about us, not just about making a sale. The less self-oriented they seem, the more intimate it feels.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I'm much more likely to trust a company or product if it's got a ton of positive reviews from, people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And, if it's been endorsed by, some expert that I actually trust.
Yeah.
And also the company just has to seem, genuinely helpful.
Exactly. And Google gets this too. They really emphasize EEAT, experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness in their, in their guidelines for how they rank websites. And it's a direct reflection of this whole psychology of trust. And then there are all those features, like those little review snippets that pop up right there in the search results. And, they make sure you can see who wrote something. It's all about providing those trust signals right when people are in that ZMOT phase.
And I remember those examples you shared really illustrated this. Like, wasn't there a B2B consulting firm that had much better results when they used case studies with, specific numbers than when they just used general testimonials?
Yeah. What they found was that by, including actual metrics and data, they were giving people concrete proof. It wasn't just, we're good at this. It was, here's exactly how we've helped other companies. It gave them a lot more credibility. And then there was that enterprise software company, and, they actually optimized their technical documentation, which sounds kind of boring, but it was actually really smart.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. They took something that could have been, super dry and technical, and they turned it into a trust signal. It showed that they were, thorough, knowledgeable, and they really cared about their customer success.
So it's not just about having information. It's about having the right kind of information, the kind that actually builds trust, especially online. Now, you also talked about, how ZMOT isn't the same for every decision. It changes depending on what we're trying to decide.
Right. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. The psychology is going to be totally different when you're, deciding on something you're going to buy on impulse versus, a big long-term decision.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm just, buying a new phone charger online, my ZMOT is probably like, 2 seconds. I look at the price, maybe see if it's a brand I recognize, and that's it. But if I'm, picking a CRM system for my entire company, well, I'm going to be in ZMOT for weeks probably. Maybe even months.
Exactly. And this really ties into Daniel Kahneman's work on System 1 and System 2 thinking. For those quick, low-stakes decisions, it's our System 1, the fast, intuitive part of our brain that's driving the ZMOT. We're just looking for a quick gut feeling, But for those big, complex decisions, System 2 kicks in, the slow, deliberate, analytical part. And ZMOT becomes this much longer, much more involved process.
And you mentioned Philip Zimbardo's research on time perspective. How does that fit into all of this?
Oh, right. Zimbardo's work, it shows that people, we have different orientations towards time. Some of us are very present focused, it's all about right now, and others are much more future oriented. And this actually influences how we approach ZMOT. Someone who's, very focused on the present, they might just be looking for an immediate solution, like what can solve my problem right this second. But someone who's, thinking about the long term, they're going to be more interested in, in-depth comparisons and long-term implications.
And Google seems to be getting better at you understanding this, right? Like how the same search can mean different things depending on, who's searching and what their time frame is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Their algorithms are getting much better at figuring out, do you want to buy something right now? Like in stock near me? Or are you just starting your research and you're looking for, comparisons and different options?
And this means businesses need to create content with those different timelines in mind.
Yeah.
Right. Like that sauce accounting platform you mentioned.
Yeah.
The one that created different content for people at different stages of making a decision.
Yeah, exactly. They really aligned their content with those different temporal dimensions of ZMOT. From the very first time someone hears about cloud accounting all the way to, thinking about implementation timelines. And by doing that, they were able to connect with potential customers at every point in their research. And they saw a big jump in their conversion rates. And then there was that professional services firm, the one that developed specific content for each month, over a 3 to 6 month research phase.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a really smart way to nurture those leads, especially when you have a longer CMOT. It's all about giving people the information they need when they need it, wherever they are in their decision-making process.
Okay, so we've seen how ZMOT has changed how we do research, but you were also talking about how it's actually changed what we're searching for. That shift from keywords to intents.
Yeah, and this is a really fundamental change. Early search engine optimization, it was all about matching those exact words people typed into Google, the keywords. But as we learn more about ZMOT, we realize that those keywords, they're often just a very rough way of expressing a much deeper underlying intent.
It's like we don't always know the right way to ask for what we want when we're typing into that search bar.
Exactly. And psycholinguistics, Steven Pinker's work really highlights this. There's often this disconnect between the words we use and the meaning we're trying to get across. Keywords, they can be ambiguous. They don't always capture the full picture.
And this is where speech act theory comes in, right?
Right. Austin and Searle's work, it distinguishes between the actual words we use, that's the locutionary act, and the intended message, that's the illocutionary act, and then the effect we're hoping to have, the perlocutionary act. And traditional SEO, it really focused mostly on those, those literal words, the locutionary act. But with ZMOT, the focus shifted to understanding the intended message. Like, what is the person really trying to do with their search?
And Google's been working on this too, right? With BERT and then
Absolutely. These algorithms, they're designed to go beyond just the surface level. They're trying to understand the nuances of language, the context, how ideas relate to each other. And then there are all those other features like, search journey tracking and related searches. It's all Google's way of trying to get a more holistic picture of what we intend, across multiple searches.
And for businesses, this means like a total change in how they create content. Like, wasn't there a B2B financial services platform that shifted from like using all that technical jargon to actually focusing on the problems their customers were having?
Yeah, they completely restructured their content. They stopped using, all industry terms and started talking about things in a way that their customers would actually search for. And they saw a huge jump in their organic traffic.
Because they were speaking their customers' language.
Exactly. The language they were using during that ZMOT phase. And then there was that IT infrastructure company. They created these searcher personas, based on the different intent patterns they were seeing.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a really smart approach. They recognize that not everyone who searches is looking for the same thing. You might have technical people searching and business decision makers searching, and they all have different needs, different ways of talking about things.
So it's about understanding the why behind the search, not just the what. Now, Google also, they came up with these 4 main types of search intent, right, based on their ZMOT research.
Yeah, this was huge. They found that there are 4 predominant intents that drive most searches. Informational, when we're just trying to learn something new. navigational, when we know where we want to go online, transactional, when we're ready to, buy something, take action, and then commercial investigation, when we're, comparing our options before we buy.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, my mindset is totally different when I'm just trying to find information versus when I'm, ready to whip out my credit card.
Right. And Jerome Bruner's work on, how we represent information in our minds, it really supports this. We process things differently depending on, what we're trying to do. And Google's search results, they've really evolved to reflect these different intents.
Like, you see those knowledge panels for those informational searches. And direct links when you're just trying to get to a specific website. And then, of course, shopping results when you're, in buying mode. And all those comparison features are perfect for that commercial investigation phase.
Exactly. And businesses that really understand these different intents, they can create much more effective content. They can target people who are in a specific mindset, like that Sauce HR platform. They focused on that commercial investigation type of content. Stuff like best HR platforms for mid-sized manufacturing companies.
Very specific.
Yeah, and it worked. They saw a big increase in the quality of their leads. People were coming to them already knowing what they were looking for, ready to make a decision. And then there was that B2B logistics software provider, the one that restructured their content around those 4 intent types. They saw a big increase in engagement metrics. People were spending more time on their website, clicking through more pages.
Because they were finding exactly what they were looking for at each stage of their research process. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the rational, logical side of ZMOT. But what about the emotional side? How do our feelings influence all of this?
Yeah, and this is it's something that a lot of earlier models didn't really account for. We often think of search as this purely logical thing. We're just trying to find information. But every search is also driven by emotions, curiosity, anxiety, excitement, maybe even fear.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm like researching some weird home repair issue online, it's definitely some anxiety mixed in there.
Exactly. And Antonio Damasio's work on the somatic marker hypothesis, it really shows that emotions aren't just like an afterthought. They're actually a key part of how we make decisions, how we evaluate options, how we weigh the pros and cons.
So ZMOT isn't just about like cold hard facts. It's also about managing those feelings that come up when we're trying to make a choice.
Exactly. A lot of our searches, they're aimed at calming our anxieties, making us feel more confident in our decisions. And Google's paying attention to this.
Yeah, you mentioned that they're focusing more on those satisfaction metrics and doing sentiment analysis on reviews.
Right. They want to know if people are actually feeling good about the information they find, not just if it's, technically relevant. And businesses are starting to realize that they need to address the emotional side of things too, like that cybersecurity company. They actually saw a big jump in engagement and leads when they started incorporating, the emotional aspects of cybersecurity into their content.
Because it's not just about like, firewalls and intrusion detection. It's about, the fear of being hacked.
Yeah.
And they were offering peace of mind, right,
Yeah.
along with the technical solutions.
Exactly. They address both the rational and the emotional needs of their audience. And then there was that company that makes those creative collaboration tools, the ones that really honed in on that tension between like the creative teams and the IT teams.
Oh, right, yeah.
That was really smart. They tapped into a very specific emotional conflict, and it ended up being their highest converting asset.
Okay, so, we started talking about ZMOT as this pre-purchase research phase.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's become a lot more complex than that. It's not just one thing anymore, is it?
Definitely not. The old marketing funnel, awareness, consideration, decision, it just doesn't really seem to fit anymore.
No, it doesn't. Research shows that our decision-making processes are rarely linear. It's not just a straight line from A to B. We're jumping around, going back and forth, revisiting things. Paul Zak, he's a neuroeconomist, and his work really highlights this. Our decisions, they're often these messy, nonlinear paths.
Yeah, I do that all the time. I start researching something, then I get distracted, then I come back to it later with a whole new set of questions. Exactly. And each time we go back to search, we might be doing it for a different reason. Maybe we're just exploring it first. Then we're looking for validation, trying to confirm our initial thoughts. Or maybe we've already bought something and we're just looking for reassurance that we made the right choice. And Google, they understand this. Features like, search history integration and personalized results, they all acknowledge this non-linearity.
And businesses need to adapt to this, right? They need to think beyond just, that first search and consider the whole journey.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't there an enterprise software company that actually mapped out their customers' search patterns?
Yeah, they found that on average, their customers were doing something like 22 searches over a period of 3 to 5 months before they made a decision. So they completely changed their approach. They created these content clusters that addressed all the different questions their customers were asking at every stage of that process. And it paid off. They saw a big increase in both their visibility and their conversions. And then there was that professional services firm, the one using progressive profiling.
Oh, right, where they're kind of tailoring the experience based on what you've searched for before.
Exactly. They're recognizing that each interaction is part of a larger journey. And then, of course, there's, mobile smartphones have totally changed how we do everything.
Oh, yeah.
And Google introduced this concept of micro moments, those little bursts of intent that happen throughout our day on our phones, our laptops, everywhere.
Like when I, quickly Google the weather before I head out.
Exactly. And cognitive psychology research shows that, our attention spans are getting shorter. We're constantly switching between tasks. So a decision that might have happened, in one sitting on a computer is now happening across these little micro moments spread out over time.
And each of those moments has its own, little psychological context. Like, I'm going to be more or less focused depending on what else is going on around me.
Exactly. And that's why Google's so focused on, mobile first design, voice search, and those quick snippets that give you the answer right away. They're trying to meet the needs of these fragmented decision journeys. And businesses need to adapt to that too. They need to create content that's, easy to digest and relevant to those specific micro moments, like that B2B technology consultant you mentioned, the one that created those short mobile-friendly pieces for executives.
Oh, yeah, because they realized their audience was like, busy CEOs sneaking in research during their downtime.
Exactly. They knew those execs didn't have time to sit down and read a long report. They needed something quick, something impactful, something they could read on their phone. And then there was that SaaS platform, the one with the micro content strategy.
Right. Yeah. Tailored to different people, different contexts.
Exactly. They recognize that in a lot of companies, you've got multiple people involved in the decision-making process, and they're all going to be engaging with information in different ways at different times. So, okay, we've been talking about this division between online research and what happens in the real world, but it feels like that line is getting blurrier all the time.
Totally. It's not like this clear separation anymore between, online ZMOT and that in-store FMOT. I mean, I know I've definitely stood in a store looking at a product while simultaneously Googling reviews on my phone.
Oh, all the time. And it makes sense, the idea that our minds are separate from our bodies, it's kind of an outdated idea. Our thinking is connected to our physical experiences. We're not just brains in jars. Decision-making, it's not just this digital thing. It flows across our online and offline lives. And search is kind of becoming the bridge between the two.
Yeah, like those Google features, see what's in store, and those local inventory ads, those are all about connecting what we're seeing online with what's actually available near us, right?
Exactly. And businesses are starting to get this. They're thinking about how to create a seamless experience that goes from, the website to the store and back again. Like that B2B office equipment provider, the one that started doing virtual tours of their products and letting people schedule demos online. They were directly connecting the digital research with the real world experience. And then there was that field service management software company. They actually optimized their content for location-based search.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they realized that their customers, those field technicians, they were often doing their research, their ZMOT, out in the field on a job site. So they made sure their website was easy to find and easy to use in those specific real-world contexts.
So ZMOT has really come a long way from those early days back in, 2011. What do you think the future holds?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is this growing awareness of the unconscious, the stuff that happens below the surface. Early on, ZMOT was very much about, conscious information seeking. But now we're realizing that a lot of our decisions are shaped by things we're not even aware of.
Like the design of a website, right? There are those subtle things that can make a website feel trustworthy, even if I can't explain exactly why.
Exactly. You know, those dual process theories of cognition, they highlight this difference between, our explicit thinking and those implicit processes that happen, kind of in the background. And research has shown that a lot of our behavior is driven by those implicit processes. And during ZMOT, things like cognitive fluency, how easy something is to understand, the mere exposure effect, the fact that we tend to prefer things we've seen before, and priming those subtle cues that activate related ideas, all of these things can influence our decisions without us even realizing it.
So Google's looking at those behavioral signals, right? Like,
Right.
how long we stay on a page, what we click on, to try to get a sense of what's happening beneath the surface.
Exactly. They're trying to capture those subtle signs of satisfaction that go beyond just, asking people for feedback. And businesses are starting to use this knowledge too. Like, remember that B2B technology provider, the one that found that visually simple content actually performed better? Yeah. It's probably because it was easier for the brain to process. It created a more positive feeling, even if people weren't consciously aware of it. And then there was the SaaS platform using language matching. They were using the same terminology that their potential customers were using, and it created this sense of familiarity, this cognitive fluency.
It makes them feel like they're speaking the same language.
Exactly. It builds a connection on a subconscious level. And, another thing that's changing is, a lot of decisions, especially in the business world, they're not made by just one person.
Right. It's usually a team or a committee or something.
Exactly. And ZMOT is increasingly becoming this group activity. People are doing research together, sharing information, influencing each other. Social network theory, it talks about how decisions spread through these social connections. And in B2B, you often have these buying committees with people playing different roles, and they all need different information.
So it's not just about my individual needs anymore. It's about finding information that I can use to persuade others or to support a decision that a whole team is making.
Right. And Google's getting much better at understanding this whole social aspect of search. Features like shared search results, they're a sign of that. And businesses, they need to create content that speaks to all the different people who might be involved in a decision. Like that B2B software company you mentioned, the one that created content for each of the different roles in a typical enterprise deal.
Oh, right, yeah, because the CFO is going to have different questions than, the IT manager.
Exactly. They recognized that they needed to address the needs of everyone at the table. And then there was that professional services firm. They focused on making their content really easy to share internally. Yeah, they wanted to empower their advocates within those potential client companies, make it easy for them to share information with their colleagues. And it led to a big increase in referrals. And finally, looking ahead, we're seeing this huge shift happening with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it feels like search is becoming less about just answering our questions and
Yeah.
more about, like, predicting what we need before we even know we need it.
Right. And that actually aligns with, how our brains work. Our brains are constantly trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. And ZMOT, it's starting to incorporate these predictive elements. Search engines are getting better at anticipating our needs even before we type anything.
Like, Google Discover, where they show you articles they think you'll like, or those smart notifications that pop up with, information that might be relevant to what you're doing.
Exactly. And we're seeing businesses using this too, like that B2B technology provider that created those predictive content clusters, They were basically anticipating the next question their customers were going to ask based on what they had searched for before. And then there was that SaaS platform, the one with the personalized resource recommendations. They were using AI to guide their customers through the information they needed, kind of like a virtual concierge.
So it sounds like ZMOT has gone from this relatively simple concept, back in 2011, to this incredibly complex, multifaceted thing. It's ongoing. It involves multiple people. It happens across our online and offline lives.
Exactly. It's a reflection of how messy and complex our decisions really are, and how intertwined our lives have become with the digital world.
And all of this, this understanding of ZMOT, it's not just changed marketing. It's actually changed how search engines work at a fundamental level. It's not about keywords anymore. It's about intent. It's about understanding what people are really trying to do.
And the future, it probably involves even more sophisticated, psychological models and even more AI, trying to anticipate our needs before we even know what they are.
So In a way, ZMOT has become this psychological mirror. It's showing us not just how we use search, but how we make decisions in this world where we have access to almost unlimited information.
Absolutely. It's not just about, search engine optimization. It's about understanding the human mind.